Welcome to another episode of Contentstack Live with our host, Jeff Bacher. We're excited to have Dabble Majithia, our product manager, joining us today. Welcome to the next episode in our Power Productivity series titled Thinking Composable, Think Workflows. Let's dive in.
Hi, Double. Welcome to Contentstack Live.
Hey, hi, Jeff. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Hey, so the topic, this is actually part of a little mini-series, Power Productivity, Thinking Composable, Think Workflows. So this mini-series, Power Productivity, we're really trying to hone in on some of the kind of critical productivity capabilities, things that really are important for both the business practitioner and the developer. Previously, we looked at live preview and how that was really important for content editors and giving them the ability to preview content in advance and how that's really important. We looked at live preview and some of the release scheduling capabilities. But today, I really want to shift gears and talk about workflows. Maybe not exactly like a new term in the industry, but super, super important for what we do in content management and digital experiences. So you being the expert, let's start with just maybe what is a workflow, and just kind of ground people on kind of what the term kind of means, and we can kind of unpack that from there.
Sure, definitely. So if you are asking about workflows in general, you can think of a workflow like a system or a mechanism for managing repetitive processes and tasks which maybe occur in a particular order. So for example, let's say if you take a software company, there would be a development team who would first maybe create a piece of code, get it reviewed, push it to production, and then get it tested. So there's a sequence of steps that happen repetitively, right? So that's their workflow in general. And if we talk about in context of content creators or content editors who are creating digital experiences for their customers, we can have a very relevant example, such as a typical content creation team would have a workflow with like several stages through which their content is passed. So for example, let's say a content creator would first create a draft, then it is passed on for the review. It then be sent to the SEO team who could add SEO details, maybe to media team who would add rich media files such as audio, video, images, and things like that. And then to a proofreader, and then lastly maybe to an approver or someone who's finally looking at the whole piece and publishing it publicly. So that would be like a workflow for editors or content managers. In context of digital experiences, that could be their workflow. So there could be a variety of workflows for different teams doing repetitive tasks on a daily basis.
So workflows in part are conceptual. I mean, just when someone, both either development side or the content side, is trying to think through a project, they're thinking through what stages of things that need to get done. And that could just be as simple as a workflow that they have in their head or something they could whiteboard. So, and I love your example around content and content management. So how does that really help, like from a productivity perspective? Like, what is it having one or not having one? Like, how does that really become like critical, kind of like the glue in all of this?
That's a very great question. So it is really, really beneficial, and it becomes more important more beneficial when you have a really well-defined workflow, right? So the first part is to define the workflow pretty well. And if you have that in place, and especially for content editors, it could have multiple benefits to multiple stakeholders. Let's say if there's a content manager or someone who's overseeing the whole process, defining workflow gives them an opportunity to, define the whole process of content creation so that they are in better control of the content that is being pushed out. And on the other end, if you talk about content creators, firstly, they know where do they fit into the whole scheme of the content creation process. It also ensures that there is consistency, because once you have the series of steps defined, you know that your piece of content is planned to go through the exact set of steps that you have defined. So be it passing it through your brand guidelines or having SEO in there, you know that whatever is being pushed out has gone through the series of steps that you've defined earlier. And lastly,
so I had a question on that, just in that, because we'll get into how I actually set a workflow up like within a system, but just as you've described, how many stakeholders get involved in defining what the workflow is. Not so much the setting it up in the system, but you talked about SEO and like, the content creation and going through different stages. Is there one mastermind on the business team that's like, this will be the workflow?
So it depends from company to company. So generally, a suitable team or a suitable set of people would be someone who knows the whole workflow. So if we take an example, maybe someone who's just creating stories for an online newspaper may not know the whole workflow, but chief editor or someone who's reviewing through the whole thing would know what are the steps that the story would go through until it is published on my website. So someone who knows the end-to-end process would be an ideal person who can define this workflow, and it can go through quick stages of review where everyone agrees that this is the final workflow. And also, of course, it keeps evolving. Once you know that there are some gaps or there are some additional stages which I would want to remove, you can then refine the workflow and then the process is set.
Okay. And so it sort of also then reflects a little bit of the organization as well, like the workflow and it going. So interesting, your example of the editor, the chief editor having like more of a expansive view to then understand how that is then transited into a workflow.
Yep, certainly.
So these workflows, is it one workflow? Like as an organization is scaling, how complicated or what is this all under the hood look like a little bit?
Yeah. So no, one word would be, different teams would have, different teams would have different workflows. So I could give you an example here. So think of any modern enterprise today. Even when you're talking about content creation, there's content creation happening at different levels at different teams. So if you again take an example of a typical software company, there's a technical documentation team creating a lot of product documentation. Mm-hmm. There's maybe marketing team creating, long form blog posts as well as social media posts. Maybe there's a separate knowledge-based team who's creating content for their other properties such as an academy or a community. All of these are very different pieces of content. Maybe it would require a very different workflow. So the process that you follow to create and publish a social media post would be a little different from what you follow to create a blog post, and then very different from what you do for technical documentation. So ideally, even the same team would have different workflows for different pieces of content.
Very interesting. So let's talk a little bit more like within the Contentstack platform, what we're doing, and maybe a little bit of like your background around just how we've come to develop whatever capabilities it is that we have.
In Contentstack, we have this feature called workflows in general. It was released like quite some years ago, and I was part of the whole process where we had planned the workflows and how it would be used, because I was also closely working with the technical documentation team, and I knew how what stages we have set for our content creation. So in Contentstack, our workflow features kind of has everything that we discussed in the past few questions. It covers the whole essence of how you would create your content throughout the process of content creation. So in Contentstack, it is broadly broken down into two parts. So one part is workflow stages. Other part is publishing rules. So when you talk about workflow stages, it helps you define all the stages that you would want for content creation. So think of it like draft stage, review stage, SEO stage, and publishing stage or approval stage. So those are, this is where you will define the workflow stages, and you can also go a little granular to define permissions on who could create content when it is at a particular stage and would move into another stage, or whether or not you want to give access to a particular set of users when it is on a particular stage. So that's where you define the whole process about the stages and the permissions. Yeah. And the second part is publish rules, where you define governance around who could publish it, when a person would be able to publish it. Do you want to publish it when it is at a particular stage, or you want to publish it when it reaches the end of workflow? So those things around publishing, you could define the rules there. Yeah, and you could create from very basic workflow to very complex workflow, and you could have a lot of workflows for different types of content that you create.
What makes one more basic versus more complex? And we'll be able to show a little bit in a second, but.
So if there's a small team who's kind of creating content very quickly, there's just a couple of reviewers doing it and then publishing the content, then that would be a very simple workflow, which would have stages like draft, review, and publish.
Yeah.
Whereas when you talk about a large enterprise where there are multiple smaller teams involved in doing all of these different tasks in the content creation process, such as drafting, review, and then proofreading, adding more details such as media files and putting the relevant SEO details or creating hero banners for your blogs, you could break it down into different stages. And as I said, you could also put a lot of permissions around it. That would make a complex workflow, and you could go up to 20 stages, and you could have different workflows for different teams.
And that could just be, again, one workflow of multiple or many workflows within an organization. So maybe we can bring up a demo, but maybe just something to think about just as a question as we're doing that. But all of this, is it like a nice to have, or is it every one of our customers or all the customers that use our work, they set up workflows?
It totally depends on the need of the user. So I've seen a lot of organizations, they use some external applications to manage their workflows. With Contentstack, of course, our customers get this flexibility, or rather this advantage of having this workflows feature being inbuilt into the system, so that you don't have to depend on any third-party application to do this. And the very fact that there are a lot of applications today providing this feature helps us understand that there is a widespread need to manage or streamline the content creation process. And that's what most organizations do these days.
You want to maybe bring up a screen? You can maybe show us a little bit inside the platform of what
sure.
A practitioner actually gets to see.
Yeah, so I'll try to keep it simple for this demo. So let's say if you are a typical mid-size or a large enterprise and you would want to have certain stages for your content creation process, someone who knows the end-to-end process would be the best person to set up this workflow. In Contentstack, if you are logged in, under settings, you have this tab called workflows where you could define workflows. So I have a workflow with me. So if you see, you can start with providing a relevant name and description. You can define the scope of this workflow as well. So this is where we talk about having different workflows for different content types. So let's say if you are, as mentioned, if you're a news agency, there's a separate team working on, let's say, sports news, and a separate team working on movies. Those could have different content types within Contentstack, and you could have very different workflows for both of these. And this is where you define the scope. So let's say if there is one team involved in creating blog posts, you could create a very specific workflow for blog. So this is where you define what all content types would have this workflow. Then you could go ahead and start creating workflow stages. As mentioned, you can go up to 20 stages in this workflow. So you can have stages such as draft and review, rework, media files, SEO, on hold, upload, and it totally depends on whatever stages you would want to have here. And when you go into the details of each workflow, of course, you could give the name and description, but you could also have some governance around it. So this is where you define the next available stages. So let's say if the content piece is in draft stage, do you want the users to be able to select only the next 2 stages, or do you want to see the whole workflow where they could select any stage? So you could have granular control over how the content is being passed on to the next stage. Likewise, you can restrict certain users to move this entry or this piece of content to another stage, certain users or roles. And you can also restrict access to entries based on stages.
We talk about this like workflows, like with governance. So this is exactly what you're talking about then, really, in terms of the governance. It's really controlling how you can skip, what you can see, what stages, or the process through which you can pass through stages.
Yeah, I mean, you can do this for each of the stages. So if you have, and a prerequisite would be to have your workflow defined, maybe on a piece of paper or on a whiteboard. with all the granular permissions and details that you want for each workflow, it will then become very easier to create this workflow and get it in operation. So yeah, you could go ahead and define these workflows and permissions. Also, just in case the content piece doesn't get stuck somewhere, let's say if only some people have access to a piece of content and those people or that person is not available, you could have some super users who could bypass all these rules that you have defined and then do anything with that piece of content. So really someone like a chief editor or an admin person who could move things from here and there, you can add that person as a super user here.
So normally, for example, if there was something that we absolutely knew needed to go out and it was ready to go, you could skip all these steps essentially then. So you're just going to push. Otherwise, it's going to want to make you go through all these steps and different people would help to approve. Got it. Yeah.
Exactly. And then lastly, you could enable or disable this workflow. Only when you have enabled it, it will be available to all your content editors who are creating content on Contentstack. So we can quickly jump onto that part as well, where let's say if you are creating an entry for the blog content type, within this entry, you could access workflow details from this icon here on the right. Now, this is where you see the workflow details. As of now, because it is the starting of the workflow, the default stage is draft.
Yeah.
But let's see if you work on some of the details here. Once the person who's responsible for creating the draft is done with creating the content, they can change the workflow stage and maybe select review. They can also put a due date if required. Can assign it to certain users. Though, let's say if there are a lot of users in the next stage, you can assign a certain user or a certain role so that it could go to all users of that role. Just in case they don't miss it, you can notify via email, add your comments, and then update it. This will give a notification to the next set of users, or rather the users who are plan to work on the next stage. They'll get a notification and they'll start the process all over again until it is passed on to the last stage.
Yeah.
And the other part of workflows, publish rules. Let's say for the same blog post, you define certain rules around publishing. So again, in the first few sections here, you define the scope. Like, do you want to have some rules around all content types or specific content type for all the languages or for specific language? And publishing rules when publishing to a particular environment or all the environments, you can define all those details here. And then for publish or unpublish action, or for both the actions. So once you define the scope, you then come to the actual conditions or the rules part of it, where you could have at least one condition, but at the max, you can have two conditions, such as one is the approver. So if you want someone to approve the publishing or unpublishing of a piece of content, you can add those people as approvers here, and you can add individual users, or you could add roles altogether here. Once you do that, that piece of content would not be published until the approver approves it. And second is workflow stage should be. This defines whether or not a person would be able to publish if it is at a particular stage. So if you want a piece of content to be published only if it reaches the approval stage or approved stage, you can define it here. And let's say if you do something like that, and if you go to the in the same entry and you had defined that this piece of content would be, you could publish it only if it is at approved stage. And right now you could see it is at review stage. So if I try to publish on production for English language, it shows me a note that it cannot be sent without approval. It shows me who's the approver here. So there are no chances that it may go out without anybody's approval.
Yeah. And I can see too, I mean, just from this, but just with more and more content and more in different points with which you're publishing, I can't see how you could get away without having this, right? Like it could get just really, really out of control really, really quickly.
Right.
But this really helps to kind of break down, right? Just the thought process that would drive what a workflow would be, but also just then the controls along the way. And then obviously on the whole kind of the publishing side too. That any other things that you wanted to show us here while we've got the the screen's kind of still up.
No, I think that is it. It then all depends on how you're, as I said, step number one is to first define your workflow, maybe on a whiteboard, and get all the stages properly defined. It is then very simple to just put it on Contentstack and get it out working.
And what you showed us, I guess I should ask then, it's not table stakes necessarily that so within a platform that there is a workflow capability, or perhaps even like this level of capability or functionality, I should say. So is that true? Like don't assume that you're going to get a workflow capability when you're, picking any old headless CMS is another way. I guess it kind of packaged that.
Yeah, not many providers have this built-in. Contentstack does. So if you're working or if you have Contentstack, you get this by default.
That's good to know, because again, like as it said, it seems like you're going to get serious with your operation. You'll need to figure this out one way or the other. And then the benefit of bringing this in the platform itself is, this is where the practitioners are really spending the bulk of their time, right? Creating the content, publishing it, putting it and sending it through different stages through an organization. So the more that is happening within the platform, you could just see from what you're sharing here, just how it brings like the human component and the people behind the scenes or that's driving the operation, like in connected every step of the way. And they can see how things can very easily get sideways.
Yeah, certainly. So it really helps in collaboration, as well as, that your content is not going out to any third-party application where you are managing this whole workflow. It is all within the system. It is all within Contentstack, where you are actually creating the content from end to end. So it really makes sense to have the controls, the stages, the overall governance within the system as against having it outside the system.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Well, thanks for sharing that. And let's see, that you really covered a lot. This has been super helpful. I know there's typically, as we go through one of the episodes, we have some questions that do kind of come in. So, Austin, let's see if you got some questions for Dhaval and take it from there.
Yeah, you got a couple. This one is, where can I learn more on workflows, especially around best practices?
Great. Right. So we have a lot of documentation around what are workflows, how to set up workflows, some sample workflows, what to keep in mind while defining workflows. So I'll pass it on and we can put it as part of our episode notes there, so you can access it from there.
Most of that thing kind of all within our kind of general knowledge center and kind of documentation set. But I know we also have Contentstack Academy. I know we're not sure where we have currently yet developed course-wide there, but primarily just steering people to the documentation.
Yep. All documentation links.
What else, Austin?
Yeah, this one is, what's on the horizon for workflows that you can share?
Oh, okay. Great. So we have a full-fledged workflows feature working, and most of our customers are using it. So we are planning to give more granular control or more things around governance that is still under planning. So in the short to medium term, we'll have something around that. We're planning to change the whole experience. So of course, all of it is very inbuilt and attached to the content creation, but we want to make it more seamless and more easy for editors to use it. So everything around how they pass on the content from one stage to another, how they get notification, we're rethinking on that. So we will have a whole new experience of managing workflows there. So yeah, that's very cool. That's what we've planned in the near future.
All right. We'll keep an eye on that. And for sure, we want to have you come back and talk about this or anything else you want to share. This has been great. The demo and everything you kind of brought to light around just the workflows, how quickly they can become kind of a complex kind of thing that you really need to kind of get your arms around, and how well that the platform has been able to do that. Any other things you want to share before we part here?
Yeah. So one last thing, let's say, if you are a Contentstack customer and if you're watching this, if you have not yet enabled workflows, I would request you to start doing that, because as Jeff mentioned, it's very easy. Things could get out of control. Once you have the workflows and stages defined, it is all within control. So If you haven't used it, start using it.
That's good. And we will for sure have your contact info also in the episode notes so people can reach out and connect with you, also get access to the documentation. But again, I know super busy. So thank you so much for taking time to join us today. And for all of you out there, we will see you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jeff.
Be sure to check out the show notes for relevant links and content. To learn even more about the power of going composable, head to contentstack.com.